Okay, so last month I posted a video asking you what books are really hyped, and then I went through the list and the ones that I've read. I told you, okay, by my estimation, is it worth the hype or not? In this video, we're basically going in the opposite direction, and I looked through the books that I've read over the last 2 years, because that's as far back as I trust Murphy. Old Murphy didn't, she had a different kind of reading taste. About 2 years, and looked at the books with the lowest Goodreads ratings that I happen to love. Not just any old book, not a book that I felt, yeah, it was okay, but a book that I love and I had such a good time with, and it's rated so low. And this is a list of 6 books, which I realize is a very unsatisfying number, but I was unwilling to cut one to make it 5. 6 books that I think are deeply underrated. Books that I not just liked, but really, really, really enjoyed, that I want to pitch to you, and you might check them out despite their Goodreads rating. I've sorted these books by their rating, so we're gonna start with the lowest rated book, and then we're gonna work our way to one that, you know, it's not that bad, but I want it on the list anyway. So the first book on this list is one that I don't own because I got it from the library. It's called Divas the Sea, Red as the Sky, and it has a 3.57 rating on Goodreads. So I do understand why this doesn't work for a lot of people. So if you've ever heard of the Chinese pirate queen Qingji, this is a fictionalized version of her story with some liberties taken. And I love Qingji. Okay, I guess I'll put it this way. I really enjoy reading about pirates, be it historical pirates and their legacy, or fictional pirates and their swashbuckling tales. And so I didn't realize that this was Qingji's story. It doesn't say that anywhere on the back description or the cover or anything, but right off the bat, I recognized her tale because I love reading about her story. And there's not a lot that we know about her life and her legacy. But I was just really excited to read a fictional version of her tale and to elaborate a little bit more on what her story might have been. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this probably didn't work for a lot of people. One, I read several Goodreads reviews because I was trying to understand when I first finished it why it had such a low score, and a lot of people said that it dragged a lot, that it felt like a historical account of a real person rather than a fictional swashbuckling tale. And I don't know what to do with that criticism because it came up a lot. And I don't know what to do with that criticism because I personally didn't feel that way. In fact, I thought this book was rushed. And that's my main qualm with it, is that we had so many time jumps. She would have a major life event and then we would just skip forward several years and then go on to the next major life event. And I wanted this book that was under 300 pages, if I'm remembering correctly, I wanted it to be like a 500-page book. I wanted to explore her life because I wanted more from her life. So I don't know, but I do know that the structure of the book was odd, and I guess maybe it read a little bit like a historical text instead of like an exciting I don't know. There was a lot that happened in this book, so I don't get it. But she starts off working in a pleasure barge, and then she is taken in by a pirate king, by a pirate captain, who then dies, and she gains command of the fleet, and this is her legacy. And it is told, as far as the framing of the story, it's very non-traditional for a book. And I realize that I am biased because I happen to be really interested in this particular pirate, and I'm happy to read more about her even in a fictional setting. But even without that bias, I still think that it was a really interesting story and there was a lot to get from it. So this is the lowest rated, and it's also probably the one that I would push on you the least because I understand why it wouldn't work for a lot of people. But I personally loved this book. Oh my gosh, this is wild to me still. The Grace of Kings, 3.77. Again, I understand why the ratings are low. Structurally, this is written in a weird kind of way. So Ken Liu is an award-winning short story writer. And his short story collections, I read a short story collection before I moved to his novels, and his short stories are phenomenal. And he's really good at articulating so much in so few words. He's so good at packing such a big punch and make you really think after just a little bit of time with him. And he wrote his first novel in a similar manner, where there is one overarching plot and one overarching story that's happening, and that's of a rebellion. This takes place among several island countries that have been conquered and are now under occupation, and they have a new emperor who is trying to unite them under one banner. So he's giving them like new laws and rules and squashing down their culture and their language to unify them, to streamline things. And when he dies at the very beginning of the book, a rebellion starts up because there are people who still remember their lives under freedom. They remember their lives as it was before they were under this one banner, before this emperor came in and ruled them. So it's them rising up, and it's multiple perspectives, and their different roles in this war, as well as very flawed characters constantly making mistakes and assumptions about one another, and you know how war really changes a person. So there's a lot going on in this book, but and I think it's because Kin Liu started off as a short story writer, that could be a misjudgment on maybe he did this completely on purpose, but he wrote this book in what feels like a series of small arcs that all pan out into a larger arc. So a lot will happen. I mean, two characters will meet, court, marry in 2 pages. Like, a lot will happen in very condensed timeline. And so this book covers so much, but it's a lot of little stories that add up to a lot. So I totally understand that not working for a lot of people. It totally makes sense to me, but Kin Liu's writing is so gorgeous, and the story that he told was so gripping to me. And this kind of serves as a prologue to the rest of the series, and The Wall of Storms is one of the greatest sequels I've ever read. So it's such a big book for me to say, just get through the first book, because I hate it when people say that, but just get through the first book. I mean, I thought that this was a 5-star book for me. But I understand why it's not a 5-star book for everyone. And I don't accept it. Actually, I don't accept it. I understand it, but I don't accept it. Next on the list is Mapping the Interior. It's a novella, and it has a 3.8 rating on Goodreads, and I think it deserves so much more. For a little bitty book, this packs an incredible punch. So this follows a boy, I think he just goes by Junior, who his family move off the reservation, and now they're living in a new area right after his father has passed away. And then he starts seeing his father's ghost. He feels like the ghost is trying to tell him something. He feels like his dad is coming back to them. And so he's trying to pursue this thread. He's trying to follow this. And then he starts discovering that there's a lot more to this house than he thought. It's a lot bigger, and there's a lot more to it than he originally thought. And as well as that, there's a lot of supernatural things happening, not just the ghost, but things are appearing and then disappearing. There's situations that, there's really graphic scenes in here, really graphic gore in such a little bitty book. The horror elements, the physical horror elements are strong. And there are scenes that it's like, what did I just read? What just happened? But it's a story about generational trauma and generational expectations, and what people, the kind of legacy, the kind of future that people expect of you because of where you've come from. It's about, on a more minor scale, it's about family, and it's about bullying, because he does have a brother who's very severely bullied. It's about finding your own ways in life, and it's also about where you come from. And I don't know, I feel like if you're a fan of Pet Sematary, which is one of my all-time favorite horror books, then you would be a fan of this. Like, Pet Sematary fans, this book is like 100 pages long. It's 108 pages long. You should be reading this. Man, I don't know. This novella packed an excellent punch. And I know that Stephen Graham Jones writes weird books, and so a lot of his books end up with very mixed ratings because of that. This is an excellent novella. Next book is A Natural History of Dragons. This is the first book in the Lady Trent series. This follows Isabella at the end of her life when she's retired and she's an old lady and she has nothing to lose. And these are her memoirs. We're reading her memoirs. And they're told in the voice of someone who's already been through it all. And now she's like, let me tell you the real story. Let me tell you the struggles I actually had. Let me tell you the hurdles I actually had to overcome. And you know that really awesome thing over there that you thought was awesome, that you were like, wow, how clever, how amazing. I made it up as I went. I didn't know what I was doing and I was scared out of my mind. So this is her, and also just talking about like, listen, I messed up. Like, I did this one wrong. And so it's just a very blunt looking back at her life as a naturalist. She studied dragons. This is fantasy sci-fi. From a very scientific perspective, as well as from the perspective of someone who was practicing naturalism in a time where women's rights were not commonplace, were not really accepted. And so she had to overcome a lot of hurdles to be recognized in her field to the very end. But it's also a lot of real life social things, like having to get approval to do certain studies, or having to work closely with her partner in these studies, in marriages and children and life, and balancing all these things. So it's Isabella's story. And it is very slow moving, and it is a natural history of dragons, and dragons are basically not present in the first book. And on top of that, book 2, I think, is the weakest in the series. So it is kind of a tough pitch. Personally, I loved book 1. I think I gave it 4 stars. And book 2, I didn't love. But then books 3, 4, and 5 were all easy 5-star, phenomenal reads. But I also, as much as I love dragons, I also wasn't completely put off by the fact that the first book had very little dragons in it, because this was the beginning of her memoir. This was the beginning of her story. This is her trying to get into this field of research, and I knew more would come, and they absolutely did. And some of the adventures she got up to, some of the things she got to see and experience, oh my gosh. And by the end of her story, when we came to a close of book 5, I was so unreasonably happy for her, for all that she was able to accomplish, and look back on her life and say, that was my life. That was my legacy. That was what I did. I was like, I'm so proud of you. I'm so happy for you. And I was so proud of the way she managed this very tricky situation that she was in, dynamic that she was in, and how she tackled motherhood in the midst of all of it. And like, so much of her external and internal struggles, how she overcame them and came out on the other side saying, that's my life and I'm proud of it. And I was just like, she's not even real, and I'm so proud of her. Next on my list is Don Quixote, which has a 3.89 rating on Goodreads. I will be brief about this one because I've talked about it quite a bit recently, because I only recently finished it and it was in my top books of the year so far, and I loved it so much. But this follows a man whose name we don't know, who has read so many books that he loses his mind and can't tell the difference between reality and fiction, and starts just perceiving everything in real life as this fictionalized thing, and as himself as a knight. So for instance, one of the most iconic scenes of the book is when he sees a windmill and he perceives it as a giant with 8-foot-long arms, and he must joust it. And he regularly finds himself in pain because of these situations, or he finds himself doing things that aren't awesome, like attacking an entire flock of sheep because of his delusions. And it's comedic and it's funny, but it's also very side tangenty. I could see people saying these books are way too long because it's so side tangenty. But I could also see people not liking this because they don't read the second half. So this is 2 books that have been combined into one. These books were written 10 years apart, and they just are oftentimes bundled. But that's one book, that's one book. And if you just read book 1, then I could definitely understand feeling like, okay, but was it worth all that? But book 2, I think, adds so much more to the commentary that's happening. It really takes a lot of your expectations and twists them, and it turns from a comedy to a tragedy in a lot of ways. And it's much more of a look into the human tendency towards selfishness and sometimes cruelty. And it does so much more than you might think if you only read the first book. But I mean, I guess it's fair to rate it just by the first book, since they were 2 books. So what do I know? I also said I'd keep this brief. I really like this book. Final book in this video, the highest rated. In this video, I just said 4 stars as my standard, because on Goodreads, Usually if it's 4 stars, then like good, it's a good book. But if it dips below 4 stars, that means it's getting a lot of mixed reviews. So that's kind of, anytime I'm looking at a book, if it dips below 4 stars, I'm like, ooh, let me read a couple reviews, because that means it's not hitting a lot of people well. So that was kind of my standard. And this final book on my list just barely dips below 4 stars. So this probably wouldn't cause me to pause, but I wanted to talk about the book anyway because I really like it. It's called House of Salt and Sorrows. So I don't really read much YA, but I did read this because I was really in the mood for a environmental seaside spooky book, because I'm always in the mood for that specific type of story. And I went to my Instagram and I asked people to recommend a story like that to me, and this is the one that came up the most frequently, so I bought it and I read it and I was obsessed with it. So if you don't know, I have a very light obsession with lighthouses and a very large obsession with the ocean. And this was, there was a lighthouse scene in this book. I know that's a really dumb thing to care about, but it made me so happy. So this takes place, I read this like a year and a half ago. This takes place not on the mainland. This is on an island. It's a manor that's off the mainland, and they're kind of self-sustaining, and they're also very removed. Now, there's a curse on this family. There are 12 sisters, and there's a curse that they're all gonna die. And so far that's been true. Each of these sisters are dying off, sometimes through sickness, sometimes through tragic accidents. But this book kicks off when our protagonist, whose name is Annalee, sees her sister potentially get pushed off a cliff. This is no accident. This is no supernatural happening. This is a murder. And so she's trying to figure out what's going on. And when she tries to pursue this, she starts to see things in her manor, and hauntings begin happening. Her sisters who have died are coming back, but in these really twisted versions. And then on top of that, as she's trying to follow these clues and as she's trying to figure out what happened to her sister, she's also following these clues to other realms. And so there's like that whole thing happening too. Plus there's a wicked stepmom, because, you know, gotta have that. So some things that are not awesome about this book, there is a romance in it, and the romance is oh so cheesy. It's oh so cheesy. Actually, I think that's the only thing I remember not liking about this book. I think I loved everything else about this. Just like the cheesy romance was the only thing that I was like, because there were a couple of things as I was reading it that I was like, but then once I got to the reveals, it all worked together, and I was like, hands up, I'm happy. But I think the things that really connected with me the most about this is that it's a manor on the sea, and it's very environmental. The setting of this old manor that is surrounded by water, and this spooky hauntings that's happening inside of it, a full-on horror scene that happened inside of a lighthouse. Like, all of the environmental things around it is what really sold me about this book, on top of, I think that I love haunted stories. I love a haunted house, a haunted island, a haunted ship. Make it haunted and I win. So I love the way she handled the hauntings. I thought that they were so creepy. I loved the setting. I loved the curse. I didn't even mind that there was a mystery in the core of it, which, if you know me, I'm not really a mystery gal. I loved so much about this book. I don't know if it would work for everybody. I could definitely see this not working for a lot of people, but it just did for me. I loved this book. So there you go. Those are 6 books that I think are underrated, the books that I loved, not just liked, but loved, that have lower ratings than I think maybe they, at least by my perspective, lower ratings that I would like for them to have. Let me know if this video piqued your interest for any of them. If you've read any of them, feel free to talk about them with me, and feel free to post any books that you have loved that you feel are underrated. I post videos every Monday and Friday on this channel, Tuesdays and Thursdays on my review channel, where I talk about everything that I'm reading as I'm reading it. We have weekly reading vlogs, we have spoiler review discussions. I'll see you again soon. Bye.